The word compassion in our word English comes from the Latin root compassio, kompathein in Greek, which means to endure something with somebody else. Look into your own heart, says the golden rule, discover what gives you pain, and then refuse under any circumstance whatsoever to inflict that pain on anybody else. And Confucius said, you don't just do it when you feel like it, but all day and every day. In this way, you overcome the ego. Rahman, in Arabic, is related etymologically to the word for womb, which evokes this theme of mother love. And the icon of the mother and child is a universal one, but mother love is hard. A mother has to get up every single night to her crying child, whether she wants to or not. She has to put her own needs on the back burner and be aware and responsible for that child at every second of the day. Again, it requires a constant transcendence of selfishness. Eventually that little cute baby grows up and can become a horrible disappointment. But the mother doesn't give up with the child, is with the child until the end. And there's a Buddhist prayer that says, let us love all creatures as a mother her only child. And that is the kind of love we have for all creatures, not just the people we like. Karuna in Sanskrit, very little to do with feeling, though it talks about loving kindness, but that's another form. It means that you take responsibility for the pain of the world and work practically to assuage it. It's not enough just to have, a nice warm feeling of sorrow and pity when you see something in distress. If you are bound, you have an obligation to do something about it. Not one of you can be a believer, said the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, unless he desires for his neighbor what he desires for himself. The golden rule again, which means, who is my neighbor? All of the sages insist that you cannot confine your benevolence to your own group. You must have what one of the sages called yan ai, concern for everybody. Love the stranger, the foreigner, says Leviticus. Love even your enemies, said Jesus. And reach out to all tribes and nations, says the Quran. Now, it seems to me imperative to implement the golden rule globally so that we ensure that all peoples, whoever they are, whether we like them or not, are treated as we would like to be treated ourselves. And if that does not happen, I doubt that we'll have a viable world to hand on to the next generation. Now, forgiveness, whereas compassion is for everybody, we've all got to do it all day and every day, and we owe it towards everyone we meet, whether they deserve it or whether they don't. Forgiveness is something more specific. On Yom Kippur, it's quite common in some Jewish communities for you to examine your conscience, and if you're aware of having injured or offended or hurt somebody in the past year, to go to him or her and say you are sorry. And this has to be wholehearted. I don't know about you, but I often find that when I'm apologizing, it's quite easy for me to make it clear that the other person is also at fault and has had to a sort of self-preservation thing. But no, just to be wholehearted in this. And the person who has been wronged is supposed to respond with equal wholeheartedness. Not, the Talmud is quite clear, you must not hold on to a grudge. You have to hang on, you have to let that ego go, where we cling on to how we've been hurt. Let it go and accept that, all in the interests of peace. You have to lay aside, again, both parties have to lay aside the ego. Just as in compassion, you have to dethrone yourself from the center of your world and put another there, all day and every day. You cannot tell other people to forgive people. This is quite strong in the Jewish tradition. And we need to remind ourselves of it, because we're quite good at sort of saying in a flippant way, well, surely it's time to draw a line under that, forgive and forget, etc. We can't say that for other people. A friend of mine, a woman friend of mine, told me quite recently, even though she's been involved in the peace movement for years, that she was ready and was about to go to the jail Israeli jail where her son is kept, to forgive the person, the jail where the man who killed her son is kept, to tell him that she forgave him. And that is a very, very long and complex journey. And it can't be dictated to by other people. It takes a long process of battling with yourself, reaching out to the other. And she was saying, he may just think I'm mad, but this is something I have to do. Now, as I say, we're often a bit flippant about this. I remember being once told by a well-known journalist and economist, when I was talking about the difficulties that have accrued from colonialism, for example, well, I think it's time, there has to be a statute for limitations on all of this, whereby these people lay down this grudge. You cannot tell other people to do that. Because the whole point about the Buddhist notion of karma is that deeds have consequences, and they can go on for a very long time. In my study of the world religion, have come to the conclusion that if we British had behaved more in accordance with the golden rule in our colonies, there would not be so many political problems today. This goes on. Deeds have consequences, and sometimes they come back and hit you. People say the same thing. Come on, surely it's time for the Palestinians to realize it's a done deal, that their state has gone. Or, come on, it's a long time since the Holocaust. You can't talk about these things in that way and tell other people it's time to forgive or forget. Even if you are not personally involved in that wrongdoing, I'm going to come to that in a minute. We have to take a certain, in that Buddhist sense, responsibility for what has happened. I was brought home to me way back in 1982 when I went out to Israel to make a film about St. Paul. I was working with an Israeli film company in Jerusalem. And I went out there knowing nothing at all about the Middle East problem between the Arabs and the Israelis, apart from, what everybody knew. But of course, once you're there in the middle of things, everybody talks about the crisis. And the one thing that I noticed that they all had, the Israelis and the Palestinians had in common, was the way they spoke about the British. And I began to realize this was not just the Middle East problem, it was our problem too. Something that we had helped to create. And therefore, we are somehow implicated in it. I was told, that a few years back there was a project in the US to sort out the Rwanda crisis and force the various tribes who'd injured one another to live together in neighborhoods. This, again, is the sort of, to speed up the whole process of reconciliation. This is a mischievous thing. After a trauma like what happened in Rwanda, you cannot dictate to other people who've been injured in this way, who've lost people, who will probably be psychically scarred for the rest of their lives by this, to sort of make friends immediately in this forcible way. This is a journey, and it has to be respected without well-meaning, perhaps, busybodies on the sidelines. Now, but where there is an overlap is that both compassion and forgiveness demand a transcendence of the ego, a transcendence of selfishness. You have to go beyond your sense of righteousness and entitlement when you forgive an injury. And you have also to see, as the Charter for Compassion puts it, in compassion, if you are living according to the golden rule, feeling with the other, reflexively putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and saying, what would it be like in these circumstances? You have to dethrone yourself from the center of your world and put another there. And that's why, one of the reasons why the religions all adopted it as the swiftest path to enlightenment, because they are agreed that what holds us back from enlightenment, from what we call God, Brahman, Nirvana, or Tao, or from our best selves, is our selfishness, our petty concentration on me and mine and number one. When you do it all day and every day, compassion, it is the safest way to arrive at that. Empathy, you have to see, so you have abandonment of ego, and as we saw with forgiveness too, you have to lay aside that pride, that self, I didn't do anything wrong, I am righteous, and you have to, if you're the one who's doing the forgiving, you have to lay aside that grudge, which is, again, a sign of ego. Very important is that compassion and forgiveness both demand equality. The forgiveness motif, as I've described it in the Yom Kippur ritual, is reciprocal. You forgive, and that has to be accepted, but then that brings you down back on a level again. The golden rule, which says that reflexively, all day and every day, you put yourself in somebody else's shoes, whether you like those people or not, is talking about equality. You can no longer put yourself in a special privileged category, but you have to realize that other people also suffer. I sometimes wish we could get our politicians to observe the Yom Kippur rite and call people up at home and abroad, all over the world, when they are aware that something has gone wrong, that harm has been done. And finally, both compassion and forgiveness demand an appreciation of the pain of the other, even of the enemy. And that, I think, is crucial. We spend a lot of time in our culture trying to keep pain at bay. And yet we're deluged with images of suffering as no previous generation before. And we sometimes want to cut that off and say, this is not, I don't want anything to do with this. It's too far from me. But this is a spiritual, moral, ethical opportunity to let those images disturb us as they break into our highly privileged world, when we see these images of suffering beamed into our on the evening news every evening into our comfortable living rooms, to make us aware of the pain of the world, to make us aware of the pain of the people we've injured, to make us feel aware of the pain of others. Because we all have pain. Every single one of us, however privileged, we will all grow sick and die, we all suffer. And we should use that to bring ourselves together and not to use our pain to divide us from others. Now, in the West, we often like to see ourselves and present ourselves as compassionate societies. And indeed, in many ways, you know, we don't do too bad a job. But how good are we on empathy, equality, egolessness, an appreciation of the pain of the other, these criteria that I mentioned, and the global outlook, which is to realize that in the global world we have created, where we are so entirely interdependent, we cannot exist without one another. Economically, we're linked. When markets fall down in one part of the world, stocks plummet all around the globe that day. We cannot live without one another. And yet our perceptions haven't caught up with this, and we're still stuck with my people. This cannot be. So let's look at how we behaved in Paris earlier this year. There is no doubt that this was an evil act. But I'd like to quote Kofi Annan here, who said we can condemn and must condemn actions as evil, but beware of saying that the people who commit them are evil, because nobody knows what is in the heart. Hold yourself back. Now, there are evil actions where, you know, it seems the wrong is all on one side. You think of the Armenian massacres, think of the Holocaust, think of apartheid, for example. And these are systems of evil that have caused immense suffering, and that we must deplore. Though, if I had more time, I'd talk about the way that we the way we should speak about these things. Now, we were, however, rather think of that apology, for example, where we tend to impress on other people how wrong they have been too. There was quite not much of that self-reflection in Paris. There's a lot of self-righteousness, not much of an appreciation of karma, that maybe whatever these appalling actions that they had they might have something to, these parts of the world may have something to forgive us for. This was a clash of sacred values. If it was indeed orchestrated, the shooting of the massacre in the magazine, this was a clash. If it was orchestrated by Al-Qaeda, then they always have a political agenda. Freedom of expression is a sacred value for us in the West. That doesn't mean because it has been endorsed by God or the supernatural, but because it's so sacred to us that it is central and inviolable to our sense of ourselves and our way of life. Without it, Western life becomes impossible. We're very proud of this. We've achieved it through great difficulty. We cannot sacrifice it. It is inviolable. What Al-Qaeda was saying, right, you attack our sacred symbol, our prophet, we'll attack yours. See how it feels. It's the reverse of the golden rule. Now, and the speed with which that slogan, Je suis Charlie, was adopted shows that people all over the place in the West made that profound identification with their attack on their sacred value. Now, it was interesting that it happened in Paris because the backdrop was the Place de la Révolution, and Liberté was blazoned on banners, freedom, and it recalled the Enlightenment. Freedom, as we know, is an Enlightenment value. Again, this was essential to our economy, and again, we're very proud of it. It's often said that in the Muslim world, they can't really embrace the modern world because they haven't had an Enlightenment. We say it in a rather superior way, not good on equality here. But the Enlightenment was indeed a marvelous moment in European history. It was essential to our modernization. It's been responsible for many of our good things in our society and our scientific advance, all that, brilliant. But let's look at freedom for a moment. It was only ever for Europeans. And people in other parts of the world are very much aware of this. There was no liberté for the African slaves who toiled in the American plantations. There was no liberté for the Native Americans. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers most imbued with the spirit of the Enlightenment, when he was president in 1805, told his Minister of War that the Native Americans were a barbarous people who must either, and I quote, be exterminated or driven beyond the Mississippi to dwell with the wild beasts. John Locke, apostle of toleration, a word I don't like, but that was his word, insisted that the liberal modern state could not tolerate either Catholics or Muslims. He said also that a master had absolute and despotical power over a slave, which included the right to kill him at any time. And he said that the native peoples, the indigenous peoples of the New World, which we were beginning to colonize, had no property rights to their land and could be fought if they opposed colonization. And that was the kind of attitude we took with us into our colonies. And we're reaping some of that bad karma today. Furthermore, many of those leaders who were marching together arm in arm, a rather motley crew to be marching for freedom of expression, I thought, but some of them, including our own Prime Minister, headed countries that had for decades supported regimes in Muslim-majority countries that have given their people no freedom of expression. And that was noted too. So now we can say, okay, but we didn't do those things in Iran. Those were our fathers, and that is true. But I think I take a leaf out of Thomas Merton's book here, Thomas Merton, the American Trappist monk, who said that when a people benefit from a system of oppression or a system of structural violence, they are somehow implicated. And we have, all of us sitting here in freedom, have benefited from what our forebears achieved. and therefore take a measure of that responsibility for the pain that we see. I wish we could be a little more humble about other peoples. I wrote a book called 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, and it's based on the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, of course, because we are addicted to our pet hates. We don't know what we'd do without them, and very much we depend upon them for our sense of self. We are what they are not. Just a couple of nights ago, when I was giving another lecture on another subject similar to this, a member of the audience afterwards had a long conversation to me explaining that Sunnis and Shiites had been fighting one another for 1,000 years. It soon became clear in the conversation that the amount of reliable information he had could be comfortably contained on the back of a small postcard. A very small postcard. But he was absolutely adamant and immovable. There's a passage in Hamlet that has always struck me. You know the story, of course, but just in case you're rusty, Hamlet is causing a great deal of trouble in the Danish court, and the king sets two of his old friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to spy on him. It doesn't take Hamlet long to find out what's going on. So one night he goes to Guildenstern with a pipe, a recorder, and he says, I pray you, play upon this pipe. My lord, says Guildenstern, I cannot. Why not, says Hamlet. Here I'm paraphrasing. It's as easy as lying, he says. All you do is blow down this tube, wiggle your fingers around, and out comes the music. And he's very aggressive about it. Play, he says. My lord, I have not the skill, says Guildenstern. Why, look you now, says Hamlet. What a poor thing you would make of me. You would play on me like this pipe. You would pull out all my stops. You would pluck out the heart of my mystery. And how often we do that to other people, even on a personal level. Oh, well, the trouble with her is. As though we could sum up the whole complex reality of a human being in a single sentence. And we do it with whole cultures too. The trouble with Islam is. The Sunni-Shi'i problem is. This is holding us back from compassion. It is not about the equality of compassion and forgiveness, though we're way down the road from that yet, to make that kind of, to see that we are not superior. And crucial to it is to recognize the pain of the other, the pain that is fueling so much of our troubles today. In Israel-Palestine, parents who have lost children in the conflict have come together to create the family's circle, using their grief and sorrow to say that this must never happen again, and using their pain to come together, Palestinians and Israelis, to work together for peace. And it's a model. They have to forgive a lot. They have to come over their own preconceptions, but this is our way forward. And I want to end with a story that is about enemies coming together as an appreciation of each other's pain. It's from the Iliad, which, as you know, tells the story of a short episode in the Trojan War, the 10-year Trojan War between the Greeks and the Trojans, in the course of which Achilles, the chief warrior on the Greek side, has a quarrel with his king, Agamemnon. And in a fit of egotistic pique, no question of apology or forgiveness or anything of that sort, he goes off and sulks in his tent and withdraws all his troops, all his men from the battle. This is absolutely disastrous for the Greek side. And in the course of the ensuing confusion, Achilles' beloved friend Patroclus is killed by one of the Trojan princes, by Hector. And Achilles goes mad with rage and grief and guilt. He challenges Hector to a duel, which they fight in front of both armies, and including Hector's family, the royal family of Troy, who watch from the city walls. And no one can beat Achilles. He kills Hector, and he mutilates the body, dragging it in front of the family from the back of his chariot round and round Patroclus' grave. And then he does a terrible thing. He refuses to give that body back for burial. Now, in the ancient world, without a proper burial, this was a disgrace that we cannot. It's hard for us to imagine in the modern world. In Greek terms, it would mean that Hector's soul would never know rest. It would be restless, miserable, wandering for all eternity. But one night, old King Priam of Troy, Hector's father, comes in disguise into the Greek camp, and he makes his way to Achilles' tent. And when he enters the tent, he throws off his disguise, and of course everybody is shocked and silent. And the old man then falls at Achilles' feet to plead for the body of his son, weeping. And he's weeping not only for Hector, but Achilles has killed many, many of his other sons too in the war. And Achilles looks at the old man, and he remembers his father. And he also begins to weep. He weeps, Homer says, now for his father, now for Patroclus. And the two men weep together because they believe in the Greeks' world that weeping together creates a bond between men, because it is that which we all share: pain, grief, sorrow. And then they stop weeping, and Achilles goes and fetches Hector's body, and he carries it and lays it very tenderly in the arms of the old man. He's worried that the weight will be too much. And then Homer tells us that two men look at each other, these two avowed enemies, each weeping for the pain that each has. They look at each other, and they each sees the other as a god. And that is when we become most godlike, when we realize that our enemies also have pain. Thank you.
Yasmin Molbokas is going to be talking about her experience of being part of an extremist religious group and how you left it.
Well, I'd like to start today, because obviously it's the month of Ramadan, so I'd like to start in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. And I'm so thankful to him that I'm here today, because obviously it's been a big journey. I wouldn't call this cult religious, although it was. This cult was different. This was a time in the 90s where quite a lot of the young Asian people were going through some kind of identity crisis or identity searching. Unfortunately, the local masajids, the mosques, were not answering most of our questions. This was a time where we saw issues around Bosnia, the genocide, the graphic pictures of where babies were ripped out of mother's stomach, the ongoing conflict of Israel and Palestine and Kashmir. And we were questioning about, well, what is Islam? Islam for us was political activism. And in this particular cult, it answered all of our questions. For people like myself, we saw ourselves as the radical reformers of the century, because we thought that having a state would create a justice in the whole world, globally. This state that would be governed by the laws of the divine. We had this vision. And the chapter of the Quran, which again was misconstrued by this cult, was Surah 3, verse 104. Let there arise you, or amongst you, group or groups that call society to the good and forbid the evil, and those shall be the successful one. So imagine this, the way this verse was embedded within us, it created this like we were now called to become the God's representative. Looking at Britain on our own home turf, we actually saw that there were major poverty. You had familial problems. Families were breaking down. There was a high rate of racism as well. So therefore, implementing this Islamic State would have, solved all this problem. People would have so-called lived in peace. And obviously, Palestinians would have got their rights. But this cult was very clever in brainwashing the young people, in separating them from their families, manipulating the text. And spiritually, we were dying. I myself was dying. I felt that I was coming out of Islam, as a matter of fact. And this was a time where I also felt that I had to cut off from my father, and I had to cut off from my mother. So slowly but surely, it was a way of isolating. We're talking about the dichotomy. We were seeing a world of good and evil, of Muslims and non-Muslims, of pure and the impure. So for us at that time, we were getting prepared. And the way the message was embedded with us is whatever happened in Bosnia could possibly happen in Britain. So this was like a preparation for us to prepare for the exodus, to go and move on into the Islamic State. Little did we know the fact that the leader of the cult was actually not a scholar. But what was attractive was because he was Arabic speaking. And more dangerously, he was a ground sound person. He would come and listen to our issues as youth. This is not what we were having. This is not one of the interactions that we are having with our majority of our local mosque or imams. And for women to join this cult was in particular that it gave us some kind of emancipation. We wanted to be the reformers of the century. We were going to have a role. And for us, this gave us a new identity. And something that I'm going to probably shed a bit on about why personally I joined might shock you a bit, but it's not an every case thing. But for women, it was so important because the traditional Islam, the true Islam teaches us that we raise our young children. Every mother is raising the whole of humanity, right? But for us, we were going to be that push. We were going to raise like scholars in this great state where all the Jews and the Christians and Muslims are going to live together again. But little did we know that the problems were beginning to see where we were controlled by the fact that we were not allowed to free mix. We had to isolate ourselves from society. For many of the followers of this cult were not allowed to go to university. I'll give you a very good example. University at that time was understood as prohibited by this particular cult, the leader of the cult. Why? Because it was considered as free mixing. So the only legitimate way for you to attend university or college was that whenever the lecturer sat down, you had to stand up and you had to thwart that lecturer's argument. So therefore, you had to provide some kind of their so-called Islamic argument. So obviously, for most people, they dropped out. For me, forget it. I'm not going to go into education. We couldn't work. So therefore, we had to start our own businesses. We're talking about women here. So for women, it gave us this social, political sort of activism now. And more importantly, because majority of us were probably mothers, so whatever was happening in Israel and Palestine, what happened in Bosnia, we thought, right, we've got to take hold of this now. But unfortunately, things started opening up to me, where I saw that a lot of the texts were manipulated. When I tried to ask people within my group, within my study circle, well, actually, this verse actually meant that. And there was this confusion. So there was this misconception about what is the Islamic State, what are we about? We're separating families from one another. We're creating anarchy. I remember in 1998, MCB Ramadan Radio, we were actually ramming up their phone and calling them, you're chocolate Muslims, what are you doing working with the government? We were actually conflicting. We had confrontation within our own Muslim community. So this actual cult was, as a matter of fact, creating anarchy, demonstrations, events. We were just going to turn it upside down. Because why? We wanted to create a revolution, right? Slowly but surely, though, what we found was when I actually started liaising with sisters from outside my region, not within my circle, because you could not trust them. And what happened was, I said to this sister, I said, do you know what, I'm really feeling spiritually down. And there was one moment when she wrote me a letter. I would always ring her. I trusted her with my life. She wrote me a letter and she said to me, she said, look, Yasmin, let me tell you something. Anything that is affecting your iman, your faith, is not coming from Islam. So that was my point where I started doubting this cult, especially when they started talking about the offensive so-called jihad, which matter of fact means offensive killing, right? Because as far as I know, studying the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he never went to kill people, never, ever, ever, never, ever preached that. And luckily, I had that bit of knowledge behind me. And then my father was really, really worried because me and my father were drifting away. I was drifting away from my brother and my brothers and my sisters. I cut off from my mum. And eventually, when my uncle sat down, and he's Orthodox Christian, he sat down. I had great respect for him. And he said, okay, Yasmin, tell me how are you going to implement this? How are you going to implement the Islamic State? I said, well, we're going to create the Exodus, overturn, society to its feet, invite people from Trafalgar Square, because we had events, Rally for Islam. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to create this big group. He said, no, tell me a bit, step by step, how are you going to do it? And who are you doing it for? That's when I started snapping out. I thought, my goodness, you're absolutely right. And there was one narrative that he taught me, and I think it was from Zaki Badawi, if I'm correct. He said, Islam is known for its dominions and not for its domination. And that's why I started stepping out. It has been a journey, 10 years. It's not easy because you've isolated not only from your family, from your friends, but you've also isolated yourself from a community as well. How do you come back? So for me, I had to be very proactive. I had to come out of it. I had to start, I was asking questions. I had to go back and re-educate myself. Now, I'll link this to why it was very, very important. And this is my case study, by the way. This is my case. This is not for the majority that were in this. And thankfully, those that were in my group have left. They left a long time ago, and they have settled as good citizens, right? But for myself, I came from a background where my mother and father had divorced, and I grew up in one foster care to another foster care. So therefore, during my foster care years, unfortunately, I lived with a family for 10 years while I was sexually, physically, emotionally, and mentally abused. So therefore, for me to have this vision of the Islamic State meant that I would bring my perpetrator to justice, right? Therefore, I can go and speak to the Khalif and say, he was the guy who did it to me, and maybe 3 more. And this was my passion, this was my drive. And there's a very good brother, I remember. Obviously, Bjorn, I've adopted him as my younger brother. And I have a very good big brother as well called Arno Michaelis. And, I'm always chatting, and there's one key phrase that he always says, hurt people, right? And because I was hurt, I understood the hurt of the people of Bosnia, my brothers and sisters, that so-called hurt. And I wanted justice for them if I didn't get justice for me. So my thing was that if I didn't make it in this life, right, I've got to make it in the hereafter, right? Because I want to be catapulted into paradise. But thankfully, I say now that I'm so grateful because Islam has brought me back. Many of my friends don't belong to the religion, whether they're atheists or not, but do you know what? I enjoy this life. I enjoy the fact that I have my father, my brothers and my sisters, my daughters, my husband. I can breathe. My neighbors, by the grace of God, are just lovely people. Obviously, I'm not a hippie, but I just enjoy life, right? And rather than concentrating on what I didn't have, I want to concentrate on what I've got, right? Beautiful saying was, why do we go through pain? And I always questioned this for probably 30 years of my life. I'm not going to tell you my age, but anyway. And there was one thing where I started opening my eyes is, God is the potter, and we are the clay. And the clay only strengthens once it goes through fire. And from the Quranic point, after every hardship, there is ease. And I truly believe that. And like I said, I am so grateful to God that I am alive today, and I enjoy everything. And, well, that's all I can say. I made a mistake. So, yeah, that's it.
Bjorn Magnus Jacobsen is a survivor of the July 2011 attacks by Anders Breivik in Norway, which killed 69 and injured 110. Tell me your story.
Well, back in the summer of 2011, I was a member of the Labour Youth Party in Norway. I was living and studying here in England in Liverpool, and had been doing so for a year. So I went back and essentially met up with old friends at a summer camp in Norway. The summer camp was held on Utøya Island, a very small island, about 40 minutes drive from Oslo, in a fairly big lake. At the summer camp, things like, teenagers flirting and all that happened, and that was, for many, the most important thing that was happening there, myself included, potentially. And there were courses going on. People were teaching about different aspects of political life. They were teaching debating technique. I went to a lecture on the morning of the 22nd of July about the political situation in Western Sahara and how youth activists were doing politics in a country that is currently under some form of occupation, where political activists are being hunted down from time to time by armed people. And I remember sitting in that room, listening to this girl from Western Sahara speak about her political reality, and essentially thinking this is as far from our reality here in Norway as it's possible to get. Little did I know that hours later I would be running from bullets myself. After the meeting about Western Sahara, we were all asked on the island to gather in the main venue, and we were told that there had been an explosion in Oslo. I myself am from Oslo, so are many others. And we were told there had been an explosion near the government headquarters. They didn't know the nature of the explosion at the time. They said it could have been a gas explosion or something like that, but Oslo doesn't really have a gas network. And a friend sitting next to me took out his smartphone and looked at pictures in the newspapers of what was going on. And I remember sitting there seeing the pictures from Oslo and seeing, this is my hometown, but it looks like downtown Baghdad. It was pretty obvious that there had been a terrorist attack of some sort. There had been a bomb. We were, during the same meeting, being asked not to leave the island. We were being told not to go back to Oslo. A lot of us wanted to. It was heartbreaking seeing our city in pieces like that, and many of us had families working in the government headquarters and in the surrounding areas. But we were being told that the island was probably the safest place we could be at that time. After the meeting, we started sharing our phones. Not everyone had battery life still in their phones. It was a summer camp where we were living in tents. So people were sharing phones, and we were trying to reach our families. And I remember calling my family. They were in the mountains, and I knew that, but just to tell them that I was okay and all of that. And as we were doing this, I started hearing this popping sound. It was like firecrackers or something. I remember thinking that this might be someone trying to scare us. This might be, because of what happened in Oslo and because of the political nature of the summer camp. It might be someone on the other side of the lake taking out some fireworks or something like that, just to scare people. And some security people, or some volunteers wearing high visibility vests, really more than security people, asked everyone to gather in the center of the camp area. The island is shaped entirely like a donut kind of thing, where a kind of pit in the middle where the camp area is, and like an edge around. So my reasoning then was that maybe someone on the other side of the lake is trying to shoot at the island. And as we were gathering in the camp, a man came walking up over the little hill that surrounds the camp. And some people started running towards him. They ran straight towards him. And as they were doing that, the man lifted a handgun, a pistol, and he shot them straight down. I instinctively turned around along with the group I was with and ran into the woods, again, over the hill that is surrounding it, not being able to comprehend what was going on. And I lay down right across the hill and called my father and said something is terribly wrong. I still couldn't imagine or kind of understand that this was really happening. I still thought it was someone trying to scare us, someone trying to mess with us, just kidding, right? This couldn't happen in Norway. It's a fairly peaceful society over there. And my father told me to stay down and stay hidden and all of that. And I essentially stayed on the phone with him for the entire time. He was sitting in the car with my family at the time. I ended up going down to a track that goes around the edge of the island, along with another friend. We started telling people to take off high visibility clothes. Red is the color of the party, and people were wearing red t-shirts, so we told them to cover up and try to stay hidden and be quiet. And along the track sat a little kid. He was 8 years old or so. And my friend and I took the kid, and we hid together. For much of the time, I laid on top of the kid, covering his mouth, trying to keep him from running and screaming in panic. We stayed hidden together for about half an hour before the gunshots we constantly heard around the island came closer to where we were. And a crowd of people came running through the woods, and in that crowd was another little kid. So the first little kid and I took the second little kid as well, and we ran around along with that crowd, along the track. And At one point, we had to leave the track. We couldn't run on the track anymore because there was a pile of people who had been shot. I remember this distinctly, seeing this pile of dead friends. And in the pile was a cell phone, and the cell phone was ringing. And I remember a moment of realization that there was someone here trying to reach their loved one who would never be able to speak to that person again. Probably someone's family. And after that, I kind of blacked out. I got tunnel vision. I kept track of where the kids were. And I remember running, but that's about it. And we ended up on the southern tip of the island, from which we could see across to land, where there was the longest line of blue flashing lights ever. Almost 90 minutes had passed by this, and we had been assured over phone that the police was on their way. There was a helicopter hanging in the air and boats on the water. And we really believed that this was the end. We were finally going to be saved. And we tried to contact the helicopter and the boats and get them to come and pick us up. And the kids borrowed my phone. I told them to call their mothers. Their fathers were on the island as security people. I told the kids that they couldn't call their fathers because the phone could reveal where they would be hiding if they were hiding. In reality, I realized that their fathers would potentially be among the first people to meet someone like the gunman and be among the first people to get shot. They called their mothers, I called my father. And as I talked to my father, I heard a sound behind me. And a man in a police uniform came out from the woods. He said they'd caught the bad guy. And he, to my eye, really looked like a police officer. But as I turned around and looked at him, he lifted his gun and aimed it towards us, and I couldn't understand this, what was going on. I conveyed the message to my father that we were safe and that the police was there. And then he started shooting at us. I jumped in the water and my phone stopped working, so the last thing my father heard was that a policeman was there and that we were safe. I tried swimming straight out along with the kids, and I was wearing a big kind of woolen jumper, and I sank. I stood up in the water. It was fairly shallow, and wrestled off my sweater. And I remember looking back towards land and seeing Breivik stand there. He took aim at me, and I realized that this was my last moment. It was a very weird sensation. I've described it previously as a feeling of the soul leaving my body. It's very difficult to convey that moment, but it feels important. It was, in some ways, a relief, and in many ways, absolutely horrific breakdown moment. His bullet missed me. I fell over in the water again, and I started making my way around a little kind of cliff on the island, again with the kids following me. And we stayed hidden under the cliff, or rather under some bushes hanging out over the water, in the water for about 15 minutes. The gunshots, we stopped hearing the gunshots, and afterwards I realized that Breivik essentially walked back up on the island and was arrested pretty immediately, or else he would probably have been able to find us. The hiding spot was not brilliant. So we stayed hidden in the water for a while. We stopped hearing gunshots, and then we climbed up on the island again as the water was about 14 degrees and we were freezing. And we sat down on some rocks. The two kids, I and 3 other people had hidden nearby. And out at the southern tip, people had died. People were wounded. And we could see that from where we were sitting. So we had the kids sit in the other direction, and we're trying to kind of, we were telling them stories. We were asking them what they wanted for Christmas, what they were going to do when they got back from the island. They were talking about building little huts in the woods with their fathers. And they were absolutely shattered, like everyone else. And after a while, a police officer came out from the woods, or, well, at least what looked like a police officer. This time it luckily was a police officer. We panicked. We tried to get back out into the water, but he put his gun behind his back rather than aiming it at us, and we were exhausted. So we didn't manage to even get down to the lake again before we realized that this man was not going to shoot us and was actually from the police. He was wearing a helmet, and it said that all the police officers on the island, the actual police officers, would be wearing helmets. And he said that he had to continue walking around the island to secure the place. And so he left us. We asked to get the kids transported over because they were really kind of breaking into panic at this point. But he couldn't help us before he had secured the island. And then after a minute, another group of police officers came. Some of them were not wearing helmets, which again terrified us, but we kind of realized that things were calming down now. And they helped us get hold of some boat, and we were transported across the water. We were taken to a hotel where families came to pick up people. Some of the most horrible things I remember from the day is not what happened on the island, although those moments are, of course, horrific in their own way. But being at the hotel, waiting for my own family to come and pick me up, and seeing other families who had come to pick up their children without being able to find their kids at the hotel, or indeed be able to find them in any of the hospitals the wounded were being sent to, was absolutely heartbreaking. Families who slowly realized that life would never be the same again, that they would never see their child again. Families who realized the severity of what had happened on the island. At first we were being told that about 10 people had been killed there. Or estimates, as we came back, was closer to 100. Luckily, our estimates was off by about 31. But still, it was pretty... We kind of realized that this was pretty severe, what had happened. The process kind of afterwards has been intense and interesting, and that, well, I've had to try and find my path back to some sort of life. And as this is an annual lecture for the Forgiveness Project, I would just like to point out one moment. He's trying to stop me. But one of the kind of most important moments for me was a couple of months after this happened. I was back in England and studying again. I decided to return to my life as normally as possible, which of course was extremely difficult. But a couple of months later, there was a hearing for the further imprisonment of Breivik in court, and it was the first opportunity I had to see him in real life, kind of after he had tried to kill me. And I went to this hearing. I traveled back to Norway from Liverpool specifically to go to the hearing, along with my lawyer, a family friend. And I remember sitting in the room, looking at Breivik and realizing that he couldn't hurt me anymore. His gun was taken away from him. He didn't have any abilities to hurt me physically. And at the same time realizing that Breivik is another human being. There had been, from the get-go, many attempts at describing Breivik as a monster, making him inhumane in many ways. People didn't speak his name. People said, "He who shall not be named," and anyone here who has read Harry Potter knows the dangers of that. And Harry Potter's been a significant influence in my coping with this. I remember the fact that I didn't want to go into that trap. I wanted to see Breivik as a human being. And I felt a need to realize that, kind of a need to recognize that we're all human beings. Violent extremists are human beings. They do what they do for reasons. Their reasoning might be misguided, but usually behind it, as Yasmin as well kind of hinted to, there are real grievances, there are real problems in our communities and in our societies that violent extremists are solving through the wrong means. And Breivik dehumanized Muslims. He dehumanized people who were in favor of a colorful community of people of all cultures living together. And even though Breivik and I are not that different, we are young white men who have grown up in the suburbs of Oslo. We are in many ways equal, but his means of dealing with his problems were severely different from mine. So we need to give people the tools they need in order to be able to handle their issues in a constructive way. Thank you very much.